First off being, we are soft for sure. I think there's no doubt about that.
Welcome everyone to Seek, Go, Create. This is Tim Winders, your host. I tell you what, we're going to have a fun day today because I have learned some new words. Yes, we've got words like telos and liminal that this guy, Tim, being the educated person that I am, engineer from the state of Georgia, I have never heard. The guest today is going to educate me on those words. They're going to educate you. And I have read their books. I know a little bit about it, but you're going to want to stick around. Before I get to the guest, I want to remind you of something that I am just overflowing with and brimming with. Everything in my fiber is nervous and excited about this novel that I've just written. And I will tell you, the novel has a lot to do with our conversation today. It is a novel that I'm calling an inspirational fiction novel. And it is a character that is going through a hero's journey, going through a catalytic change in their life. And they go through some very significant things. The title is Coach, A Story of Success Redefined. And I want to encourage everyone listening in, if you haven't already, depending on when you're listening, go to timwinders.com/book. You'll be able to either download a few chapters for free or find out how you can go get the book. My guess is if you're listening in, our launch date is May 17th. You will already be able to go to Amazon and all the other places to get my debut novel, Coach, A Story of Success Redefined. Go check it out. I'd appreciate it greatly. Today on Seek, Go, Create, I'm going to give the bio and then y'all know the drill. I'm going to ask him in his own words what he does, but we got trusted advisor and coach to the world's foremost leaders, leadership teams, and organizations. I love it already. Rick Simmons is the co-founder, CEO of the Telos Institute and author of the book, Unleashed, Harnessing the Power of Liminal. There's that word I mentioned earlier, liminal space. And I've just finished reading the book. It's a great read. We're going to discuss that. Rick, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thank you, Tim. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here and you're coming to us from, you said you're south of border down in Mexico. I'm somewhere in southern Utah currently. Before we get going though, let's kind of pretend we bump into each other, either virtually like we're doing here or sitting on a plane or something like that. And I say, hey, Rick, good to meet you. What do you do? What do you usually tell people?
Yeah, and you got it right a moment ago. As a trusted advisor, a coach to some of the foremost leaders, leadership teams, and organizations around the world. At the core, Tim, I'm an amplifier. It's my job to come into the room and to take all of that greatness, all of that ambition, all of that intellect and courage, and help amplify it in a choiceful direction. You know, it's so easy in this world today to get distracted, to take a path sort of unconsciously. And so to get clear about direction, to really be armed with an awareness of one's skills and strengths and deploy that in a direction is really at the core what we do. And I will say that in our work, that's often has professional ramifications, but it certainly has impact on one's personal life as well.
Yeah, all right. All of that's beautiful. And I want to start getting into defining things like liminal, telos, and things like that. But I want to ask a question because this is odd, Rick, but I could have closed my eyes and that could have been almost me telling people what I believe that I do at times now. And I don't mean to say that to belittle anything that you do. I hold that in great honor. And I have had this thought recently with all this going on in the world, that I'm in the right place in the right time for what I have in my heart. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I really do. When we had this notion of a book in our mind, Tim, which, by the way, just if I may, just to step back a bit, it was never my life's ambition to write a book. The journey of writing Unleashed was where a client asked us, hey, where can I learn more about that? Where do I learn more about this word liminal that you guys are using? And then 10 clients asked, and 50 and 100. And we thought, wait, maybe we ought to write some of this stuff down, right? And so we sort of felt pulled to write a book. We weren't pushing towards doing that. But it's interesting that it was well before the pandemic, or some of the things that are happening even today in this very moment, that we had the idea for writing the book. And I will say it certainly felt, may I say, preordained that maybe this text and this reference piece would be available for people in the midst of this global turmoil. It really felt that way, and I think we feel a healthy dose of responsibility to get that message out.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about what you bring up, and I wanted, as I was making my notes and reading through the book, I wanted so much to not use examples and things that have come up in the previous 2 years with pandemic and social events. And, as we're recording this, there's some conflict over in the Ukraine and all. I'm hopeful by the time people listen in, some of this has been resolved. I really wanted it to be more like today and current, but I don't think we can do that. Those are not the lives that we are currently living. So you did have a seed of the book prior to March of 2020, correct? I mean, you didn't go into pandemic mode and start writing, right?
No, not at all. We in fact, the process started well before the pandemic was ever the case. I think, Tim, what occurred to us was, just more broadly speaking, like the world itself is more indisputably volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous than ever before. And I sort of tend to go to the data a bit. If you go back to 1955, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company at that time was 75 years. That was the average, birth to death time span for an S&P 500 company. Today, it's less than 15 years. And so the life cycle of almost everything in our lives today are accelerating at an accelerating rate. And we felt like there needed to be a reference piece, a reference guide for how to manage, and not just manage and navigate, but maybe leverage for our collective benefit these disruptive periods.
Hmm. And all right, there's one thing I do want to push back on, but I believe you, but I want to kind of play a little bit of an advocate against something. Are we arrogant today to think that our times are so volatile and challenging? I'm a history guy. I think you're a history guy too. You say you check data, and I've been reading some Old Testament things recently about the nation of Israel when they're going through the Exodus, and then also I've studied a lot of Civil War history, a lot of World War I, World War II, and I think to myself, what would I be like in 1941? Let's say late 1941 or 1942, 43. And so I ask you that question, not really as a pushback, but maybe a little bit. Are we soft? Are we arrogant, thinking, oh, the times have never been like they are today? Or is that valid?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say a number of things in there can both be true. First off, being we are soft for sure. I think there's no doubt about that. And I think they're hard in different ways. Whether they're harder than they were before, we could talk at length about that. I think they're harder. I think they're hard in this way today. The amount of the switching costs that are associated with the amount of information that we have access to, the nanosecond access to new information and the volumes of information are, I think, indisputably different than it was during the Civil War or the Revolutionary War or different, epoch-like events that have occurred. I think the amount of information that we're thrust with processing, making meaning of, making sense of is different. In some ways, that's probably easier and harder, right? There's we could talk at length about that too, but I think it's hard and probably hard in different ways than it was hard in the past.
Yeah, and I'm 58 years old, so I have memory of pre-digital connected age. Our grown children are late 20s and 30, and they don't really have memory of being disconnected. They've been connected. We've got now a grandchild and about to have another one on the way. They won't know being disconnected. And I think I've heard it said that, in the early 90s or late 80s, we had like 20 things that came at us a day. And now we're getting 2000 plus. I mean, as I'm sitting here, you're probably sitting there too. I've got laptop in front of me. I've got a phone to my left. I've got an iPad to my left. I've got a remarkable digital pad. And then I've got a stack of books over here. I've got stuff, and I'm in a space that's the size of less than a closet, in my RV here, but yet I've got access to massive amounts of info. And I'm going to jump into something that I think you guys do at your company. And I still have some definitions I'm going to get to in a little bit, because I know the people listening are going, what is this liminal and what does this tell us? But you talk about something called a leadership venture that has just been rolling around in my head for the last few nights as I've been reading your book. And to me, I've asked myself the question, and I'm going to allow you to tell people what that is when I throw it back over to you. And then I'm also going to ask you, why is it so critical in the world we're in today? Because I'm not sure that people would have talked about that as much 30 years ago, 50 years ago, et cetera. So what is it and why is it critical today?
Yeah,
The
thanks
leadership
for that,
venture. Did I say leadership venture? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that,
yeah.
And did I get that right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we talk about these curated moments of disruption or discontinuity, and in Telos vernacular, this runs from a partial day all the way to a multi-week kind of experience. This continuum of liminal intensives, we call them, and a leadership venture is really one of the most immersive experiences on that continuum. We might take a group of CEOs to Patagonia for 2 weeks, right? We might take a leadership team to the Grand Canyon, hike them all the way down, dip their toe in the Colorado. And just as an example, Tim, when we think about these, have you been to the Grand Canyon?
I have. Yeah. I'm not far from it now. I'm just a few hundred miles north of it. So yeah, it's phenomenal.
Many of your listeners probably have. And interestingly, 6 million people a year go there, high trafficked location. And yet less than 2% of the people that go to the canyon ever step a single toe into it. Less than 1% of the people ever stay overnight below rim. And far less than that ever hike all the way down in, dip their toe in the Colorado and come out. These are true 1% experiences. And on a Telos leadership venture, you do all of those things when you go to the canyon, and similarly to all the locations we go around the world. So these are really meant to be distinctive experiences, and oftentimes for people who are themselves a bit distinctive, and they're looking for something where they can test their edge. Now, to your point, why are these so important today? And I think it actually gets back to your question about why in some ways maybe it's harder and in some ways it's easier today, because so much information is coming at us. It often robs us of finding the insights that actually are within us. And that's really the essence of a leadership venture. How do we rip folks out of their corner offices, get them in a productively disruptive environment that allows them to look inside a bit. And there's actually some science around this, what we call the 3-day effect. It's very difficult to find some of the inner wisdom that exists if we're only, on a hike for 45 minutes or even half a day. Really, to get full access to that inner wisdom, we've really got to immerse ourselves for 3 days and beyond before we can really find some of that intense clarity. And that's, specific programming aside, that's really the essence of why that offering was created, and I think why people find it so valuable.
Yeah, the thing that, as I was reading through the book Unleashed, I kept saying to myself, and maybe I've been beating this drum for a while too, is that people aren't taking the time to be quiet, still, and think anymore. And maybe one of the reasons that I bring that up, Rick, is that even though I'm fully aware of it, I'm not sure that I do it enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, is that part of it? And why don't you go ahead for us during this time and go ahead and start unpacking what we mean by that term liminal, and maybe address some of the things so that we can kind of go a little bit deeper into some of the concepts you guys talk about and work with in the book.
Yeah. And I think the work that you do, Tim, the work that we do, essentially in this world, it serves as a prompt. I think, many of us know the right activities, and many of the best of us need a healthy and productive challenge or prompt to lead us into those behaviors and those activities that we already know are in our best interest. But it's hard to fight convention. It's hard to fight, the scroll through your Twitter feed and set that down and move on to the more productive activities. Well, and
Mm.
you mentioned this word liminal. By Webster's definition, if you crack that open, it is a word that essentially means betwixt and between, or a threshold. There was a moment I was in this room. There will be a moment that I'm in the next room, but then there's that threshold where you're neither in that room or the other room, and often is the case in life, whether it be thrust into this in-between period through the loss of a loved one. There was a time that my father was here, and there's certainly a time now, it's been years since he wasn't, but the shock and the suddenness of that change thrust me personally into a liminal space.
Mm.
At Telos, we define liminal space as a period of discontinuity that creates an openness to change. Period of discontinuity, a pattern breaking moment that disproportionately opens us up to other changes that may be possible.
Mm.
And I think as human beings, we're many things. Pattern recognizing, mimicking machines, certainly one of those things. So it's very, very hard to get human beings to think differently, to act differently. It's such a part of our constitution that sometimes we need these disruptive, discontinuous elements in our lives to raise our attention to the fact that things could be.
Mm. Yeah, we may have had a hiccup there. I'm not sure, but the question that I have related to that, I just wrote down the period of discontinuity so that people can have an openness to change. Now, first thing that I'm going to ask is, what if we don't want change? What if everything in our fiber, and I think we saw this culturally over the last few years, we saw it as society, is that certain people handled it better than others. Some people wanted things a certain way, and we're not going to get into right or wrong in that. But to me, it was just a lot of people that wanted back to normal. They wanted things the way they were, different things like that. And I'm not even sure how to define normal, but discuss that. Is there a way that we can avoid change, or do people like you and I never run across those type people because we're just in and around people that are always embracing change? I wonder about that at times.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that each of the words that we chose in that definition, I think, are really important to us. And it's this this discontinuity that creates an openness to change. Now, in our work, and in fact, I can think of a recent leadership venture where we took a team, and the change that occurred for them was a stronger degree of resolve of the path that they were already on. They were spending a lot of brain space considering all of these various pathways that their organization could take as a leadership team. And what they came back with was a greater sense of devotion to current path. And so change can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. Explicitly, you may not have recognized any change from the outside of that organization, but inside, they were now locked in a way that they had never been before. So change can happen explicitly, implicitly, internally, externally. And for them, that was a change.
Mm. So one of the things, and I know you guys cover this in the book, but I want to ask here, how did Rick, and I know Amy worked with you on this too, the concepts, but how did this play out in Rick's life? One of the things we don't shy away from here at Seek Go Create is we talk about redefining success. I've been very candid about some of these liminal situations that I've had, and a lot of these not necessarily curated, but I'll call it an external catalytic event that's occurred. The death of a relative that you just mentioned is something that we can't necessarily control, but yet it has impact there. Tell me some things that Rick has gone through that has impacted his thinking and thought process on this topic.
Yeah. Well, I will see your question, and I will certainly meet you there, Tim. Many years ago, as a younger man, I was pre-Telos Institute. I was working, an untenable number of hours, as we often do early in our careers, and whether that was asked of us or not, we subscribed to some of that societal expectation, I think, and I certainly did at that point. And I was on the way to the hospital to visit my mother, who had had a stent put in, and it was one of those moments. Maybe we've all had these moments over time, that I was so enthralled with what I was thinking about and where I had been and where I needed to go, that I couldn't even remember how I got into the hospital. I drove into a parking spot, and I was like, how did I even get here? I was so consumed with the other elements of life. I'm not proud to tell you that. As I was heading to see my mother in the hospital, and I went in and I saw her, and Tim, she just looked so bad. She was so pale and looked unhealthy. And it was one of those cold bucket of water moments, that I went out into the hospital and I wrote down 3 or 4 things that I'd gotten so far away from in my life. And I was about 8, 9 years out of college, undergrad at that point. And one of those was that I used to be an athlete. I was a college baseball player, and being active was such a part of my life. And how did I get so far away from that? And that I committed to the next morning I was going to go out for a run, Tim. And I did. The alarm went off at 5:30, and I got up and I hit our neighborhood, and I was going to just do a couple of mile jog, just get the blood flowing. And I couldn't make it 2 miles. I walked the last half mile in, and I'd wondered what had happened to me. And the moment of seeing my mother, the moment of shame that I felt not being able to complete that run, were both the buckets of water over my head that set me on a trajectory. Because the next morning I went out for another run, and I went a few mailboxes farther. And I went out the next morning, and I went a few mailboxes farther after that. And it set me on a journey of a few decades of finding where my edge was from a running standpoint. But it was really a lot more than just about running. It was finding myself in those miles.
Hmm. Interesting. The thought that came to mind while you were sharing that was, I always wonder if these type situations, if everyone has to go through something like this. Y'all reference the hero's journey in the book, and some things I've just written. It's like a hero's journey. It's real funny with my wife. She doesn't like conflict in movies and TV shows and all that. What she doesn't understand is no one really would watch anything if they didn't have some degree of tension or conflict. And
Yeah.
the thing that I've tried to put thought into, and I'd love to know your input on this too. Do you believe that everyone is going to have to go through something like that, like your situation, like my situation with the 2008 downturn, or something like that? And then I'm also wondering, do most organizations go through something like that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. It's a really intriguing question. Do I feel it has to happen? I don't.
Hmm.
I don't think that it has to be that way. I think that the the spark of course correction can come in many different forms and in many different ways. Do I think that there is a steady stream, a renewable resource that exists, a predictable stream of renewable resource that exists in our lives, the journeys personally and professionally, individually, team or organization, that we call liminal spaces, these disruptions that occur along the way, that if we're aware of them, we're aware of their existence such that when they happen, we can better leverage them. That I believe for sure. But I think that there are folks in this world that can be extremely contemplative, extremely thoughtful, and think their way into reconsideration. So I think that the source and the spark of course correct can come in many different ways. I just think that these disruptive moments are so ripe and so renewable for us that we're just smart to be aware that they exist and we can leverage them.
So I wasn't really deceptive in the way I asked that question, but I actually had a second follow-up question that I don't think is a trick question, but it's one that has a little bit more at stake to it, I think. And that is, we have grown children. I believe you have children. I don't know what ages they are, but one of the things that as parents we do, let's talk about this parenthood for a second, not the business world, because sometimes that's a little bit different, but not really. We want to take away a lot of the discomfort or the discontinuity or different things like that from their lives. But yet we also sit back and go, you know what, had we not been through some of that ourselves, we wouldn't be who we are today. Have you thought about this process and this concept with our children and in family situations? What about that?
Yeah, for sure. And in full disclosure, we have 4 children ages 18 to 24. So we've
so you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Well, an interesting story going back some time. Our oldest was having a bumpy time in 5th grade. I'm going back many years now, right? And as the story goes famously, and I've said this, I shared this story many times with Amy present and not. So I've got the go ahead to share the story when she's not here. I think that as any good parent would do in wanting to protect our children from harm's way, she was fully invested in Kyle's 5th grade experience, to the point where one day I casually mentioned to her that she was doing awfully well in 5th grade this year, and you know, to her full credit, she began to instantly react and then paused and said, I get it, and really found the strength as a mother to resist the temptation to rob Kyle of the challenges he was facing in 5th grade. And given the opportunity to face those challenges on his own, he rose to the level of those challenges. He managed those, and it made 6th, 7th, 8th grade, you know, a real home run for him. He found all kinds of new challenges after that, but I think you get my point, Tim. And so, you know, I certainly think that there's, you know, our lives are filled with stories of overcoming those challenges, and I think that's often the way that we learn, you know, overcoming and confronting those challenges. You know, as a student of the game of change, I would say there can be other routes, but certainly overcoming challenges is a real common route to take.
Right. Yeah. I'm always curious about that, because very similar to the conversation you and Amy had some years ago about Kyle, my wife and I, every once in a while, will have a conversation about, you know, are we doing too much? Should we not be doing? And all of that. Anyway, I think that's just parenting. And fortunately, we aren't related to a lot of the people we interact with. I think we love them and we want them to succeed in the business world, but fortunately they don't carry our DNA with them and have all of that going on. One of the things that I think is a real, I'll call it tension. I don't even know if that's the right word, but friction maybe, is there is a culture in our, we're obviously, you're not in America right now, but we're, North America, Western world culture. I'll call it the Greco-Roman style of habit. We compartmentalize our lives. And I'm a creature of habit. I love getting up at a certain time, doing a certain thing, doing this, and this. I live in an RV, so my wife and I have to coordinate that. But I also know that I need to shake that up every once in a while. That's kind of what I observe you guys do with the the leadership ventures. You pull people out of their, I don't want to say their rut, but their normal habit and routine. Talk a little bit about how, we'll say the power of habit, which is great. That's how we achieve and accomplish, but why it's important to at times break those habits and go into a state of, as you were, a period of discontinuity that allows us to see things differently and get a different vision and view of what our world could be like.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's helpful to dissect some of those concepts as well, Tim. I think it's easy to want to be binary about those things. Do I maintain habits or do I break them? And I think it's worth drilling down a little bit on that. In that, again, as human beings, we're pattern recognizing, mimicking machines, as I mentioned earlier, and so it's one of the things that makes great. And important to remember that everything we do on some level works for us. Even if it appears on the surface that that's destructive behavior, somewhere in our mental, emotional, spiritual cells, there is something about that is feeding and serving an end or a need. So I think it's really important to just acknowledge and honor that whatever those habits or patterns or behaviors are right now, they are serving us on some level. Now, identifying what that end is and having an explicit discussion with oneself about whether that is the end that you want to serve with that behavior or that pattern or whatever that is certainly an opportunity. And the second thing I would say is that as human beings, we are unwilling to change until we know what won't. So when we come into a room with a leader who's declared that they want to make some changes, or the team says things have to be different, or the organization says, we're planting a flag on new changes, we actually resist the temptation to talk about what's going to be different. And we start with what's going to be enduring. What will be true forever on this team? Let's catalog that probably long list of things. Our commitment to our purpose, the way we work together, all of these things. And then you're left with this shorter list of things that could, or maybe should, be different, but now it's much more manageable. We all have some firm footing under us about what's going to be the same. So we have, knees are bent, feet are shoulder width apart, we're ready for it. Now we can tackle the things that might be different. But I know that sounds so simple, but the ordering of those things is just utterly important. What will always be true and enduring? Now, as human beings, we're capable of absorbing and considering what might be different next.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both you and I are in a seat or in a role that we feel probably strongly that sometimes people need guidance in going through these processes. But I want to ask this, and we ask this with humility. Can someone do this process on their own? Can someone that's listening in right now go, you know what? I like what Rick has to say. I'm going to get the book. I'm going to read through it, and I'm going to make this happen on my own. Do you think they could do that?
Yeah. Well, and I think about this more like a dial on a stove or on a stereo than I do a flip of a switch, right? I think that there is a self-study, a self-authored track along this work where someone can get it to a certain point. I think that one on their own can do it at a certain pace. The folks that call the Telos Institute are people that don't have the luxury of time or incompleteness. So they need both a complete pivot, a complete answer to a pathway of transformation, and they need it done in an appropriately accelerated manner. And so I would say if time and completeness are no issues, I think one can author a path towards transformation. But if time is not a luxury, and a true, complete, transformative path is what is desired, that's really hard to do on one's own.
Yeah, I think that's good. A lot of the examples y'all gave in the book, there was some form of, usually an event, something that happened. Someone was thrust from a COO to the CEO role somewhat unexpectedly. There was a change, and I like the examples you gave with the Smuckers organization, which everyone knows that name. And, most people don't consider an organization that's been around for decades to have to go through this, but yet they had significant change in their industry, and y'all laid that out well. I'll let the listener go get the book and get more details on that. But I do find it interesting, and I love what you said, because one of the things I want to make sure that I don't do is spend time in an echo chamber where I'm just getting a certain perspective. And very similar to you, Rick, the people that come to me, they're usually ready, or they're close to ready, or we can find out if they are, and things like that.
Yeah.
I do wonder at times what the masses are doing. And as someone who's putting out a podcast here, I'm sitting here going, what can Rick and I do, or what specifically can Rick do? Yeah, we could say, go get the book and all, but what could we say or do here for someone who is probably not going to engage, or they may not engage at a corporate level or executive level? What's a micro thing that people can do, Rick, that might help them deal with some of this, a period of discontinuity, something that allows them to be open to change? Because we're going to have it. We're coming out of some things, but we know we're going to have more coming up. Give just a few micro tips just for the person that might be listening in.
Yeah, I love this question, Tim. I love that you framed it, because I think we can get a little esoteric and philosophical about this from time to time, myself included. And I'll share a quick story, because I think this, what I'll call liminal agility, if I can use that term, this ability to not just survive and navigate these disruptive moments, but really leverage them for all the possibility that they hold. I think looking at it as that it's a fitness level we can obtain, I think is helpful. And I'll share a story. Years ago, I conducted a social experiment with myself. And the experiment was this: for 2 weeks minimum, I committed myself to 2 weeks. I was going to drive no faster than the speed limit for that entire 2 weeks. And at that time, I was on the road a lot. For those that know me even pretty well, they would tell you that I typically would drive no slower than the speed limit where I'm going. So this was a disruptive set of 2 weeks for me. Tim, I saw things, I heard things, I experienced things I had never experienced. I had been down these roads thousands of times. I'd been by that building hundreds of times. And yet I had a completely different 2-week experience. It taught me that I had to change up where people sit in our office, just because it was time to be mildly disruptive and provide people some fitness level around those small changes. So that was a real portal for me. And I would just encourage, your listeners today to be creative about small things they can do, precisely to your question, that can open their eyes to how small changes can yield big shifts in perspective and understanding.
What came to my mind as you were doing that? So we're talking little things now. I am predominantly left-handed, but I'm sort of ambidextrous. And I've got a little toothbrush. It's a little electric thing that I use. And I actually noticed that my gums on my left side were just feeling a little more sensitive than normal. And so about a week or so ago, I decided I was going to begin brushing my teeth right-handed.
Wow.
So small, little, I mean, again, people are like going, man, these guys were talking like change the world. And now they're talking about
Right.
changing which hand they brush their teeth with. But that's an example of what we're talking about, right? And I've noticed I'm sitting here doing it going, all right, I'm not doing it as hard. I'm more light on, and I'm like, this is kind of cool I'm a mature guy all of a sudden saying, I'm going to start brushing my teeth with the different hand. Very similar. Is that correct?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And it precisely. And I'm sure, any of us can sort of think about those times when those small shifts yielded some changes. And I think the real invitation, there's a couple of invitations in Unleashed, but one of those is to understand that we can curate some of those moments. Like we all have stories of, as we mentioned earlier, loss of a loved one, a job change, a job loss, or fill in a divorce, things like that, that are hard and painful. And some of them are unpredictable. But I think we can prepare ourselves, as I did for those 2 weeks, where you can prepare yourselves, but you can predispose yourself to, I wonder what I'm going to learn here. Because the power in these periods is really what you're learning. It's a little bit less about Rick, driving at a certain pace. It was all the learning that came from that change or that break in pattern, much like the break in pattern you just talked about.
Yeah, that's good. Speaking of Unleashed, I'm actually just scrolling here, looking through the highlights that over the last 2.5 days, I've actually read through the book. First of all, I want to applaud you. Being I've tried to become more cultured, but I grew up in the South, and anytime someone can take a book that has so much depth and meaning and have a Days of Thunder NASCAR reference in it, we are not going to let the listener know what we're referencing. They're going to have to get the book. But I did highlight, wow, he just went Days of Thunder example here. Whoa, man, that is awesome. So anyway,
Rubbin is racing.
That's right. That's right. And I can still see Robert Duvall slapping that tire saying, boy, you can see what you did here. And this is how you do it right. And then Tom Cruise. Yeah. Anyway.
So good.
So yeah. So, all right. So I'm going to hit a few of my highlights in the time that we have remaining. Yeah. But, for, a question I love to ask authors, what'd you learn about yourself during the writing process? I actually have as I've gone through writing something, it literally has opened up chasms inside of me that I never knew existed. What'd you learn about Rick while you were going through this process?
No one's asked me that yet, Tim.
Oh my goodness. Well, do we need to move on? Can you answer?
Right? No. We're here in session with Rick Simmons, right? No, that's a great question.
I just hope you don't say, well, Amy wrote it all. I just put my name on it.
That's right. Yeah. It was fun watching her.
Yeah, she was awesome.
I will say it probably is a question about what I learned and what we learned together. I think we relearned that part of what has made Telos possible is the wildly diverse skill set that she and I have, the complementary aspects. We've seen a lot of friends, a lot of graduate school classmates of ours that launched off to start different ventures, and they were just so similar, Tim. And I think that what has been really helpful, I mean, now it's a big teams and things like that, but in the early days, it was the complementary perspectives and skill sets. And I think we saw that on display as we were writing the book. When she methodically was thinking through what the next sort of gate would be in the construction of the book, I had a story to share, right? And then as I thought of another story, she was able to say that, well, wow, that's two dominoes down, but we'll harvest. So I think we learned that what worked about writing the book for us was also a lot about, what got us out of the spare bedroom, if you will. It kind of got us from just the two of us and allowed us to start building an organization. A lot of those same skills are still at play. And I think, more personally, I think it allowed us to appreciate that in a way that we hadn't really thought about or appreciated in a long time.
And another thing I just thought of, this is kind of like giving the listener behind the curtain. One of the things that happens is that you do this more than you probably did before you had a book, correct? Being interviewed, right before we hit record, you said, by the way, I'm usually the one asking questions. I'm the coach. I'm the guy that's digging and, trying to find, how to make the situation better. And so I just want you, so this has got to be kind of different for you, right?
Yeah, it is. And as you know, as I shared off air, this is a period of discontinuity for me. To your point, I find my significance, Tim, by helping other people discover their own significance. So to be talking so much in a session like this is really different and productively disruptive for me in some ways. So
well,
thank you.
I'm excited that I could be a part of disrupting you in some way. So
yes, for sure.
There's a highlight that I have here from the book. A couple questions here as we kind of get close to wrapping up. The listener knows that sometimes I'll do a few approaches before we actually go in for a landing.
Yes.
I'm just going to read this and I'm going to let you share some things about it. I think we've talked about it some, but I don't even know what chapter it is. It's page 97 in my digital thing here, but we believe that catalyzing our own transitions builds the muscle for navigating those we don't initiate. And the reason that means so much to me is you're thinking through maybe a response to that or what you'd like to add to it or whatever, is because one of the most significant transitions that I went through was post 2008 with multiple companies, 7 figures. The listener that's been around has heard the story before. And one of the things I put a lot of thought into is if there's anything I could have done differently or whatever. I'm so thankful of who I am now, but I wondered if I could have duplicated that without going through it. So talk a little bit more about that. And, I think you've got the quote there. So, the theory, because I believe everyone wrestles with that to some extent. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm letting that wash over me a little bit, Tim, because hearing, not just hearing you share that, as much feeling you share that, because I can feel the vibration in how you speak about that, and I think we all have those kinds of vibrating moments. I believe that we're all the best version of ourselves that we're capable of being in every moment. Like I'm the best I can be right now. And I reserve the right that I can be a better version of me tomorrow. And I also honor and acknowledge that the Rick of 20 years ago was just doing the best he could with everything that he knew. He wasn't trying to be less than who he was capable of then. Tim showed up the very best he could when he was navigating those choppy waters back then. Could you have done something different? I don't know, but I believe you did everything you were capable of doing at that time. And if I can share a quick story, and I know we're time constrained here, but
we're good. Go ahead.
There was a really formative moment for me. I shared the story of beginning to run, and that journey of running led to really finding and testing my edge from different distances. And I found myself in a 24-hour foot race, the details of which are less important at this point, but you can imagine the training and the logistics and the preparation that goes into something like that. And 11 hours into this endeavor, I was behind pace and frustrated with myself and really gripping it, if you will. And every hour my crew would ask me a set of 5 questions, and I come around for what was now hour 12. I was halfway through. It had been much hotter that day than had planned. And, the questions were akin to, what's your goal? And I was 24 to 100. I was going to go the full 24 hours and run at least 100 miles. what's been most helpful, what's been most challenging, capturing a little data about what goes through the heart and mind of someone that runs for a long time. I come around for hour 12 and Amy, in this case, asks me, what's your goal? And I had this sort of, the only way I can describe it is somewhat out of body response to that question, Tim, where I'd said to just be okay with me no matter how far I go. And I feel that emotion literally in this moment every time I share that story, because it opened a window for me. And it opened a window for me that when we're too far into something to stop, but yet not far enough in to know how it's fully going to play out, we learn a lot about ourselves there. For me, that's the essence of liminal space. And I can't say that the story ends this way in every situation or for everybody, but I proceeded to run the next 12 hours faster than I ran the first 12 hours. And I think what we find is there is a gear within us all that can get unleashed and accessed when we turn ourselves over fully to an experience. And I felt like that's what happened in that moment for me.
Yeah. And the reason that story is so powerful, I think you referenced that in the book with some more detail too, that people can check out, is that most of us have this goal, and I'll use the word maniacal mindset of, we've got to do this. I mean, I've joked with people back in the 90s. I used to, at the beginning of every year, I'd have like 20 something pages of goals and things like that. And, I think they serve me well, but then, you go through a situation or you're in a long race like you were, you all of a sudden think to yourself and say, you know what? I'm not so sure that was the right goal. Or better yet, what I heard you say was your mindset wasn't right. You were focusing on something and all of that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the theme of this show is redefining success, because many times we're chasing after something that might be the wrong thing, but we're so, I use the word maniacal, narrow about it. We can't see what that bigger picture might be. And what I love about this whole concept of this liminal space and what you guys are talking about is that you are doing that powerful messaging that you just shared, where we're giving ourselves the grace and the space, the white space, to allow that to happen. I mean, I'm a spiritual guy, a follower of Christ. I believe some of that is spiritual. Some people might, it might be universe, it might be something else. But for me, I believe it's a Holy Spirit saying, maybe now that you're quiet, you can hear what I'd really like for you to do. And then you could relax and, make the goals in the race. I think that is so powerful, Rick. Another thing you brought up in the book, there's one more word that we'll talk about, and then we'll get close to wrapping here again, is successfully leading a team requires both confidence and humility. Just this morning, I was spending some time in prayer and writing some journaling things, and I felt as if there was a time in my life that I probably was a little bit too brash and I needed humility. And then there's been times that I probably have been a little bit softer and all, and I needed to be a little more. Got any insight on how we can be both confident and humility? And I do want to honor this conversation. When I first was doing research, I'm going, this is a big deal of a guy. He could be really, really confident. Your humility just oozes through the Zoom here. And I just want to say, I love that. And I recognize that and want to honor that. So I want to thank you for that. How do we balance confidence and humility though?
Thank you for that, Tim. And we've actually done a lot of research on followership. So what followers say about who they follow into the fray, right? And where this comes from is that they kept referring to this duality of an experience that they have, that the person was, and they wouldn't always use this language, but essentially they had these two attributes. Now, here's the rub, Tim, is that what they would talk about is not that the leader was confident in this part of the relationship or at this moment, and then they turned that off, and then they were humble over here, or they exercised the humility, that there was a dynamic that it was interwoven in itself more consistently, like all the time. And I think what we have found in then spending time with those leaders is that they are confident in the belief that they themselves and those around them can be great. They are unabashed about that, and equally clear that they and their team cannot do it alone. And it seems to be that the intersection of those two things, a belief, an enduring belief that greatness is within and it's available to us, and not shy about declaring that, and equally resolute that we cannot do it alone. So we've got to go arm in arm. That seems to be the mindset that gets leaders in the right slot and gives followers what they want.
That was worth a listen right there. That's a good clip that we'll pull out to use. I think that's a good landing point for something, but I've got a logistics question I want to ask. I actually got a copy of Unleashed, the digital version. And I'm thinking about this right now because we just finished formatting book cover and some other things for the project I'm working on. And I noticed that the title Unleashed, there's no caps. And I noticed throughout the book, the chapter headings, there were no capitalizations. And I'm reading it going, I don't think this was just a mistake. Am I correct?
You are correct, Tim. You're very observant. Makes you great at what you do. We talk a lot about a lowercase approach at Telos, Tim, and all of our marketing. Whenever you see Telos in public or not, it's always lowercase, because it is a tangible, visible reminder for us and for those that interact with us that all of the genius, all of the greatness, all of the ambition and creativity and horsepower that's necessary for you to get where you want to go, it's on the other side of the screen. We are simply a liberating component in that. We're not operating in expert mode. We're operating in liberating mode, and it reminds us of that all the time.
That was good. I'm so glad I asked that. And I'm sitting here thinking about your tagline should be something like lowercase relationships in an uppercase world, or something like that. I mean,
love that.
Literally, you guys there's so much, like I said, humility and there's confidence there. And I love it so much, Rick. I've loved the conversation. Where can people connect with you and find you? We're going to include things down in the notes and links and all of that in detail. I'll mention that in just a moment, but where do you want someone to go if they're listening in and say, hey, I need more of Rick, or I'd love to meet Amy or somebody on the team? Where do they need to go?
Yeah, so the website's a good landing page there, www.thetelosinstitute.com. And that's a good portal for a number of different things. Access to an author's page for learning a little bit more about Amy and myself and Unleashed. Of course, there's click-throughs there for the book. You can also go to any of your favorite book buying platforms and get a copy of Unleashed, Harnessing the Power of Liminal Space. Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, all of those platforms have a book available. We also have a podcast, Tim, that supports this notion of Unleashed. And essentially, it's an ongoing series of interviews with people who have had their own liminal space moment, where they have faced disruption, and how they navigated and harnessed and leveraged those periods as encouragement for all of us to do the same. So you can find that on all your favorite listening platforms, Spotify, iTunes, etc. So those are some good places to get going.
Yeah. And you know what, in my research, I missed the podcast. So I feel somewhat slack because I missed that. But I will say that anyone that listens in here will enjoy that. So definitely make sure you check that out if you're listening in for the podcast and all that. So Rick, what a great conversation. We are Seek, Go, Create, those three words. And my final question is, I'm going to give you one of those words. You're going to have to pick one over the other two. Which word resonates the most, means the most to Rick right now over the other two? Seek, go, or create, and why? And that'll be my final question.
Well, I'm always a fan of logic, and there's to me such a depth of logic to those three words. Why those three words and that order? So I really appreciate that. I sense the thoughtfulness into that, and it's so hard to pick any of those three. But I'm also a fan of the order of operations of things, and I think that so much we try to knock down the third domino before we knock down the first two. So I'm going to go seek, because I think it all starts there, and very little happens if you don't start there. And I want to honor that seek step, and really resonates with me.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick. For some reason, I'm not surprised by that response. That makes a lot of sense. Rick, I so appreciate the conversation we've had. And I knew I would enjoy it. I have enjoyed it 3x beyond what I thought I would. And so appreciate the conversation we've had. I highly recommend, if you're listening, that you go get the book Unleashed. As I said at the beginning, I've read this book over the last 3 days. It fits so well with the theme of all that we do here at Seek, Go, Create, in redefining success and just becoming all that you're created to be. So go get the book. We've got all the links in any of the notes that you're consuming the podcast or the YouTube or whatever you're on. And so make sure you go do that, which I also want to remind you that if you are a listener of Seek, Go, Create, if you go to seekgocreate.com and find the episode page, each episode has extensive notes. We have someone outline in detail with timestamps so that you could go back and re-listen to some of the responses that Rick gave, and phenomenal responses. Also, all of the resources mentioned, any book, any podcast, anything that was brought up, there are links to that on the resource page there, on the episode page. So make sure you go check that out and communicate with us. We'd love to hear any response back. So thank you for listening in. We have new episodes every Monday. This is Seek, Go, Create. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.